Chapter 41. The decision forged in the aftermath of the mirror maze was a cold, hard thing in Kaelen's chest. Passivity was a luxury he could no longer afford. The world was not a place to hide in. It was a resource to be consumed for the sake of a future worth having. He stood before his map, a red marker in his hand. He ignored the gleaming icons of official, association-controlled eclipses. His focus was on the margins, the blank spaces, the areas marked with warnings for spatial instability or chronic mana leakage. These were the places where the Veil was sick, where the anomaly's influence was strongest. They were also, according to the fragmented texts he'd collected, the most likely places to find unregulated fissures and the lairs of other sovereigns. One location in particular called to him, the Ironheart Foundries, a massive, pre-Veil industrial complex that had been the epicenter of the first major eclipse a decade ago. It was now a sealed, quarantine zone. The official story was that a catastrophic mana reactor meltdown had rendered it uninhabitable. The unofficial stories, whispered in the undermarket, spoke of something else, a dungeon that had never been cleared. A place where the phantoms were made of rust and rage, and where the very air could shred a man's soul. A place the association had given up on and walled off. A place of profound corruption. A perfect hunting ground. He couldn't ask Silas for help with this. This was a solo mission. He needed a way in, past the military cordon and the automated defense systems. He needed a different kind of help. Chapter 42. The undermarket at midnight was a different beast. The flickering neon seemed more sinister, the shadows deeper. Kaelen, with his hood drawn and his veil shroud at its maximum opacity, moved through the crowd not as a customer, but as a predator. He wasn't here to buy cores or books. He was here for information. He found his target in a secluded alcove, drinking something that glowed faintly blue, a wiry man with data ports visible on his temple, and fingers that tapped a constant, nervous rhythm on the table. His name was Cade, a freelance information broker and system slicer who had, on a previous visit, offered Kaelen off-the-books dungeon coordinates. Kaelen slid into the seat opposite him. Cade looked up, his eyes sharp. "The quiet E-rank," Cade said, a smirk playing on his lips. "Back so soon. Need another useless core." "I need a way into the Ironheart Foundries," Kaelen said, his voice low and flat. Cade's smirk vanished. He leaned forward. "You have a death wish. That place is a tomb. The association has it locked down tighter than a vault. Motion sensors, drone patrols, mana dampening fields. And that's before you even get to the things inside." "I'm not asking for a critique of my life choices," Kaelen said, placing a stack of credit chits on the table, most of his earnings from the last 2 missions. "I'm asking for a way in." Cade looked at the credits, then back at Kaelen's shrouded face. He saw something in the set of Kaelen's shoulders, a stillness that was more threatening than any bluster. This wasn't the same scared kid who'd boarded Dust Imp Core. "Fine," Cade said, scooping up the credits. "There's an old storm drain system. It's flooded, half-collapsed, and probably watched. But it's the only blind spot in their perimeter. The access point is here." He tapped a location on Kaelen's comm device, transferring the data. "I'm also giving you a spoofing code. It'll fool the drone patrol's IFF for about 60 seconds. After that, you're on your own." "That's all I need," Kaelen said, standing up. "Hey," Cade called out as Kaelen turned to leave. "They say something lives in there. Something old and angry. Not just phantoms. Something that remembers. Good luck. You'll need it." Kaelen didn't reply. He melted back into the shadows, the coordinates burning in his mind. The hunt was on. Chapter 43. 2 nights later, Kaelen stood in the pouring rain at the edge of the Ironheart quarantine zone. A 20-foot-high electrified fence, topped with razor wire, stretched into the darkness. Beyond it, the skeletal outlines of rusted factory towers clawed at the sky. He found the storm drain exactly where Cade's map said it would be, hidden behind a thicket of thorny weeds. The grate was rusted shut. He placed a hand on it and focused. A trickle of Warden energy, not to assimilate, but to disintegrate. The rust flaked away, and the metal groaned as he pulled it open, the sound masked by the thunder. The tunnel was indeed flooded, the water icy and reeking of chemicals and decay. He waded in, the water rising to his chest. His veil shroud kept him dry, a bubble of null space around him. He held his breath as a drone searchlight swept over the drain's entrance, but the spoofing code held. The light passed over without pausing. 60 seconds. He moved forward, pushing through the stagnant water. He emerged into a massive, cavernous space, the main foundry. The scale was immense. Crucibles the size of houses hung from rusted chains. Conveyor belts were frozen in time, covered in a fine, black dust. The air was thick with the smell of ozone and hot metal. A memory burned into the very stones. And then he felt it. A pressure. Not the chaotic wrongness of the mirror maze, but a deep, resonant anger. A sense of profound, industrialized loss. Alert. High-grade corruption detected. Environmental analysis. Grief-aspected manner. Rage-aspected manner. This location is a nexus of the anomaly. Assimilation potential. High. Risk. Extreme. This was the place. He didn't have to wait long. The phantoms here were not beasts or echoes. They were the ghosts of industry. Figures made of molten slag and shifting rust, their forms vaguely humanoid but twisted by agony. They didn't screech. They let out low, grinding moans that sounded like tearing metal. A rust hulk, a massive phantom resembling a worker fused with his own machinery, lurched from the shadows, its fist a wrecking ball of solid iron. This was not a fight for subtlety. Kaelen dropped his veil shroud. He didn't summon his risen rats. He reached for the new cores, the D-rank wisp and the stronger corpse rats. Risen. Deploy. Shadow and silver light erupted around him. His small army materialized. Their silent, orderly forms a stark contrast to the raging industrial ghosts. The battle for the Ironheart Foundries had begun. Chapter 44. The Rust Hulk was slow but immensely powerful. Its wrecking ball fist swung, and one of Kaelen's risen corpse rats was obliterated, its core shattering before it could even be recalled. Kaelen didn't flinch. He was learning. He directed his risen not to meet force with force, but to harry and distract. The shadowy rats swarmed up the Hulk's legs, their nuisance bites doing no damage but confusing its senses. Smoke the imp flew around its head, a blur of distracting motion. Meanwhile, his risen wisp, which he had named Ember, hovered behind him. He gave it a single command: amplify. Ember pulsed with a soft, silver light. A wave of energy washed over Kaelen's other risen. Their movements became slightly sharper, their forms slightly more substantial. Risen buff active. Mana infusion, minor, dot. Effect. All risen attributes increased by 5%. It was a tiny boost, but it was something. A glimpse of the synergy possible within his growing forces. While the Hulk was distracted, Kaelen acted. He darted forward, his body moving with the preternatural grace the core had given him. He placed a hand on the Hulk's rust-plated leg. Assimilation protocol. Targeted. Initiating. He wasn't trying to consume the entire phantom. He was trying to steal a piece of its essence, its rage-aspected mana. The process was violent. The Hulk roared, a sound of grinding gears, and tried to swat him, but his risen swarmed its arm, holding it back for a crucial second. Kaelen gritted his teeth, feeling the corrosive, angry energy flood into him. It was like drinking acid. His core integrity flickered, dropping by 10%. But he succeeded. Assimilation complete. Gained trait. Iron will. Partial. Dot. Effect. Slight increase to mental fortitude against psychic attacks. Assimilation authority. E+-D-. He had grown. The cost was high, but the gain was real. He had actively stolen power from a powerful phantom. The Rust Hulk, weakened by the theft of its core energy, faltered. Kaelen's risen seized the opportunity, tearing at its weakened form until it collapsed into a pile of inert rust and a single, pulsating, dark red core. He had his first C-rank core. Chapter 45. The Foundry was a treasure trove of corruption. 4 hours. Kaelen hunted. He moved like a ghost through the colossal ruins, his risen acting as scouts, distractions, and harriers. He avoided the largest concentrations of phantoms, picking off stragglers and smaller packs. He didn't just kill them, he farmed them. Each phantom he defeated was a potential resource. He assimilated slivers of their power, each time enduring the painful, corrosive influx, each time feeling his authority grow minutely. D became a solid D. And he collected cores. Dozens of them. D-rank rustwalkers, C-rank slag beasts. He didn't convert them all immediately. The drain would be too great. He stored them, a pocketful of potential soldiers. He was a predator, and this dead place was his feeding ground. The constant, ambient grief and rage of the Foundries, which would have driven a normal hunter insane, was like a stimulant to his Warden senses. He was made for this. He eventually found his way to the heart of the complex, the central mana reactor chamber. The massive, dome-like room was shattered, the reactor itself a crater of twisted, crystalline debris. And in the center of that crater, something was growing. It was a tree, but it was made of blackened, twisted metal, its leaves sharpened shards of shrapnel. Its roots dug deep into the broken reactor core, pulsing with a slow, sickly green light. This was not a phantom. This was a blight. A physical manifestation of the anomaly's corruption. A cyst on reality. Analysis. Anomalous growth. Rust-thorn blight. Classification. B rank environmental hazard. Function. Acts as a focal point, amplifying corruption and spawning phantoms. Directive. Purge. This was the heart of corruption the Veil Singer had spoken of. As Kaelen approached, the rust-thorn tree shuddered. From its branches, four figures detached themselves and landed silently in a semicircle around him. They were not phantoms. They were hunters. Or they had been. Their armor was rusted and fused to their flesh. Their eyes glowed with the same sickly green as the blight. They moved with a jerky, unnatural coordination. Analysis. Corrupted hunters. Designation. Rust-sworn. Status. Assimilated by the blight. Will is subsumed. Threat level. High, individually C rank, B rank as a unit. The blight had its own guardians. Hunters who had fallen here and been twisted into its protectors. The leader of the Rust-sworn, a woman whose face was half covered in corroded metal, raised a sword that was more rust than steel. Her voice was a dry rasp, like metal filings. "The Master does not welcome visitors," she hissed. "Your essence will feed the growth." Kaelen looked at the four corrupted hunters, then at the pulsating blight behind them. He had his army of shadows. He had his stolen power. He had come here to hunt. It was time to see if he was the hunter or the prey. Chapter 46. The Rust-sworn were unlike any opponent Kaelen had faced. They fought not with mindless rage, but with the cold, coordinated tactics of seasoned hunters, amplified by the blight's corrupting energy. The leader engaged him directly, her rusted sword moving with surprising speed. Kaelen dodged, his body enhanced by the core, but a glancing blow tore through his leather armor, the rust on the blade sizzling with a corrosive energy. The other three ignored him and went for his risen. One, a man with an arm transformed into a rotary cannon, unleashed a hail of metallic shards. Two of Kaelen's risen rats were shredded into nothingness. This was a real battle. He was losing. He commanded Ember, his wisp, to use its mana pulse. A wave of silver energy shot out, not damaging the Rust-sworn, but causing them to flinch, their movements faltering for a split second. It was the opening he needed. He focused his will, not on one risen, but on the swarm. He poured his own Warden energy into them, a desperate, costly move. Skill unlocked, overdrive, risen, . For effect, temporarily boosts risen capabilities by 25%. Drains core integrity. His core integrity dropped by another 15%, but the effect was immediate. His shadowy soldiers became faster, stronger, more substantial. They swarmed the Rust-sworn with renewed fury, their attacks now actually leaving scratches on the corrupted metal of their armor. The battle became a brutal war of attrition. Kaelen danced around the leader, using his risen as living shields and distractions. He couldn't assimilate her. Her will was too strong, too fused with the blight. He had to wear her down. One of his risen rats, empowered by overdrive, latched onto the gunner's cannon arm. The man roared and smashed it against a wall, but the distraction allowed another risen to scramble up his back and claw at his neck, finding a weak spot in the fused armor. The gunner stumbled, and Kaelen's risen swarm consumed him. One down. The loss of their comrade made the other Rust-sworn falter. Kaelen pressed the advantage. He was a conductor of a silent, shadowy orchestra, each command costing him focus, each loss a blow to his resources. But he was winning. Chapter 47. The last to fall was the leader. She stood over the dissolving forms of her comrades, her rusted sword trembling in her hand. "You interrupt the song," she rasped, her green eyes dimming. "The great work of unmaking." "There will be no unmaking," Kaelen said, his voice cold as the void within him. He stood surrounded by his remaining Risen, Smoke, Ember, and 6 battered corpse rats. Only order. He didn't give her a chance to respond. He pointed, and his entire remaining force surged forward in a final, overwhelming assault. They pulled her down, their shadowy forms covering her like a shroud until her struggle ceased and the green light faded from her eyes. Silence returned to the reactor chamber, broken only by Kaelen's ragged breaths. He was exhausted. His core integrity was at a perilous 45%. He had lost over half of his Risen. But he had won. He approached the rust-thorn Blight. It pulsed, as if in fear. Directive. Purge. Initiating full assimilation protocol. This was not like taking a sliver of power from a phantom. This was consuming a cancer. He placed both hands on the twisted, metal trunk. The backlash was immediate and catastrophic. It wasn't just mana. It was pure, concentrated hatred for existence itself. It was the grief of 1,000 lost workers, the rage of a ruined industry, all twisted into a weapon against reality. His vision went black. He screamed, feeling his own mind beginning to fray. The veil shroud flickered and died. The paradox core within him whined, pushed to its absolute limit. Core integrity, 40%, 35%, 30%. Warning, cognitive corruption detected. He was losing. The Blight was too strong. It was going to consume him. Chapter 48. In the depths of the psychic maelstrom, as the Blight's corruption sought to override his soul, the Warden protocol did something new. It wasn't the defensive, intelligent counterscan from before. This was more fundamental. It showed him a memory. Not his own. He saw a world of brilliant, interconnected light. A silver lattice of energy that cradled stars and nurtured life. The veil, whole and beautiful. Then, a tear. A single point of absolute nothingness. The anomaly. It was not a thing of evil, but of absence. A void that consumed, because consumption was its only nature. He saw the first Wardens, beings of light and will, throwing themselves against the tear, sacrificing themselves to stitch it closed, to create the fragile, automated system as a stopgap measure. He felt the dying Warden's hope, its desperate plea as it entrusted him with the core. The memory was a shield. It was a reminder of what he fought for, not just for his own life, but for the memory of light, for the possibility of a whole world. The Blight's corruption was a scream of negation. The Warden's memory was a song of creation. He anchored himself to that song. He stopped fighting the corrosive energy and instead began to process it. The paradox core was not just a battery. It was a crucible. It could take this hatred and grief and transform it. He wasn't just consuming the Blight. He was alchemizing it. Assimilation protocol, recalibrating. Converting anomalous energy. Core integrity stabilizing. 30%. 35%. The rust-thorn tree began to crack. The sickly green light was being drawn into Kaelen, filtered through the core, and emerging as pure, silver and black Warden energy. The metal blackened and crumbled to dust. Assimilation complete. Anomalous growth. Rust-thorn Blight, purged. Assimilation authority, D-C. Core integrity, 60%, regenerating. New title acquired, Blight Purger. He collapsed to his knees, sweat pouring down his face, but he was whole. He had done it. He had not just survived, he had evolved. Chapter 49. The difference was instantaneous. With his authority at C rank, he could feel the world in higher definition. The flow of mana was a complex, beautiful symphony he could now hear more clearly. The capacity for Risen in his mind expanded dramatically. New Risen capacity, 30/30ths. He looked at the pile of cores from the Rustsworn and the other phantoms he'd defeated. Dozens of them. And now, he had the authority to bind them. He didn't have the energy to do it all now, but he started with the 4 Rustsworn cores. They were C rank, strong and complex. The binding process was smoother, faster. The cores offered less resistance to his now greater authority. 4 new Risen materialized. They were not shadowy beasts, but humanoid figures clad in smoky, semi-transparent armor, their eyes glowing with steady silver light. They held spectral versions of their former weapons. Risen created, Rustsworn, Shadow, X4. Rank, C. Abilities, Coordinated Tactics, Weapon Proficiency, Corrosion Resistance. Loyalty, Absolute. He had his first true soldiers, a squad of former hunters, now bound to his will. He spent the next hour in the purged reactor chamber, converting the rest of the viable cores. His army was reborn, not as a swarm of vermin, but as a legion. He had 20 soldiers now, a mix of C-rank sworn and D-rank wisps and rats, with room for 10 more. He was no longer a scavenger. He was a commander. As he prepared to leave, he felt a shift in the foundries. The oppressive grief and rage were gone, replaced by a profound, peaceful silence. The corruption had been scoured. The wound was cleansed. He had not just taken power, he had healed a small piece of his world. Chapter 50. Returning to his apartment as the sun rose felt like returning from a different world. He was covered in grime and his armor was torn, but he felt more alive than ever before. The paradox core hummed contentedly within him, its integrity steadily climbing back towards 100%. He stood before the mirror. The changes were subtle but there. His ashen hair seemed to have a faint, almost metallic sheen. His eyes, once just tired, now held a depth of silver that hadn't been there before. He looked like he had aged a year in a single night, not in weakness, but in experience. He had faced a blight and won. He had increased his power by a full rank. He had a small, effective army at his command. But the cost had been immense. He had seen the true face of the enemy, not just mindless phantoms, but a conscious, corrosive force that twisted everything it touched, including people. And he had learned that the Hunters Association was not just incompetent, it was actively concealing the scale of the threat, hunting those who could truly fight it instead of enlisting them. He looked at the city waking up outside his window. They had no idea how thin the ice was beneath their feet. The Veil Singer's words came back to him. Find the weavers. Find the smith. He didn't know who they were, but he knew he would find them. Not as a supplicant, but as a power in his own right. The Ashen Crow had purged its first blight. It had tasted true power. The message to Silas and the others was simple. I'm fine. Made progress. We need to talk. The time for hiding was over. The time for building a real resistance had begun. He had his guild, his shield. And now, he was forging his sword. The hunter was home. And he was hungry for more.